Released in 1990, if you are looking at a used G-Wagon W463, you'll have 28 years of production to choose from, with the final model leaving the factory in Steyr, Austria in 2018 when the new model begins being built. Model years run from 1991 to 2018, and while there are some very marginal changes to the dimensions depending on year and trim options, almost every G-Class vehicle shares dimensions. You will, however, find these listings differently, especially as of 2003, but it is worth noting that this is caused by new standardization on how to measure a car, rather than the G-Class changing, so don't worry, you haven't got less legroom or a smaller car if you buy a 90s or a 2000s. It is worth quickly mentioning that this guide is specific to the W463 civilian version, not the W461 military model. These may look similar to the W463, but they're not the focus of this guide and are built to a different specification. If you are offered a military engine in the regular civilian car, or as a professional line car which is listed as a military chassis code but sold to the public, it will feature in the engine section. Now, usually I would go through the vehicle history here with some detailed manufacturing highlights and what specifications you want to look out for. However, this G-Class not only had the largest variations of any Mercedes model, with everything from a 4-cylinder to a limited run V12, but it also had the highest variations of body styles of any post-war Mercedes. And that's before we start talking about trim lines and country and region specific trims. So I'm going to focus on updates with an overview so you can narrow down what interests you. The lower selling models will get a mention, but limited details to give this video some chance of not running on forever and giving you all the general information you'll need no matter what G-Wagon you buy. The common fault section should be applicable to all body variants though, unless specific to a particular build. The very first builds were in September of 1989 and were used to present the new car. Most customer cars started in the mid-1990s, and in Europe these are 1990 cars. In the US and other markets that use model year instead of production year, it's a 1991 car. In 1994, there was the first update adding a driver airbag and remote locking, as well as new engines, and the 4-cylinder was dropped. This also ends the manual gearbox for most production cars, with a few noted exceptions. A convertible was added in 1997, and the straight-six engines began a transition to V6 as the new Mercedes generations arrived. Dual airbags were also added. Then in 2001, the G400 CDI was announced as a V8 diesel model that stayed until 2006 in Europe. A newer V6 diesel replaces this in 2006, and in 2007 there is a refresh of the interior with new HVAC panel, new gauge cluster and LED taillights. In 2009, the G500 becomes the G550 in the USA, a naming convention that has remained for all Mercedes to this day, while Europe and world markets retained the 500 naming. For those wanting more power, baby, the G55 got a big update in 2008, making nearly 500 brake horsepower. The AMG models will get a quick roundup in a moment. If you want a 3-door, then production ended in 2012, but the Cabrio version of this body shell stays until 2014. In 2011, there is a big update with new driver assist, mirrors, and an exterior refresh, plus the G65 is debuted. Another update happens in 2015, with the factory changing over production between May and June of that year. This time there is a variety of chassis tuning and tweaks to add the newest Mercedes technology. Then in 2017, the last hurrah begins with a special edition, a Maybach G650 Laudelette, and the swan song of the V12. A final run in January of 2018 builds the last orders of special edition models, and this chapter of the G-Class comes to a close. As a used wire, the dates that stand out will be 1994, 1997, and then a jump to the 07 update, followed by the 2011 overhaul and the 2015 refresh. Now, I know many G-Wagon lovers will want a special mention for the AMG models because Mercedes were very early in identifying something that is commonplace today. Big power in a big car moves metal. And it is very profitable for manufacturers. Now, I'll stress that many earlier AMG versions were built in small numbers, and they are hard to find, just in case you are hoping that a bargain would appear in the lineup. First, there was the 500 GE. This AMG version was built in tiny numbers between 1993 to 1995, and a collector grade car today. After that is the G36 AMG from 1994 to 1997, which is the first one built after Mercedes and tuner AMG become official partners. This gets the engine from the E36 AMG of the time and might be the most common of the 90s, but that really isn't a high bar to pass because the 1997 G43 AMG is a one-year special and is the most confusing of all the AMGs. It is likely that all that were ever built are special order cars, and chassis codes show that the first handful out the factory were intended to be G320 models before a change to the chassis intended for G500 models, all getting the C43 AMG engine. The AMG were still in position to take chassis off the line and then build special order cars for the G-Class at the time. These are so rare that my usual sources of car experts hadn't even heard of or seen one. However, all this changes in the 2000s when the G55 AMG goes on sale in 2001 until 2004 in some markets. This is a globally offered car and the entry for most looking at an AMG. It gets a naturally aspirated V8 engine. At the same time though, another very limited AMG model is built. This is the V12 badge G63 V12 AMG. Now, there are no official numbers on builds, as all were VIP orders, and from what I understand, they were VVIPs to Mercedes. Most sources in the auction world acknowledge 5 cars were built. The most recent auction sale that I could find was for $400,000, which is a little over double the reported price when they were new in 2002. Back in the land of the attainable, though, is the 2004 introduction of the G55 AMG compressor. Essentially, the previous G55 but supercharged. This stayed in the brochure until 2012, but sales numbers do seem to drop steadily after the 2008 global financial crisis, and emissions regulations meant that Mercedes were looking for a change anyway. The G63 launched in 2012 with a 5.5-litre bi-turbo, and for additional buzz and Mercedes' desire to keep attention in a market busy with hot SUVs, the G65 V12 was launched at the same time. This engine later made its way into the Maybach version of the G-Class. A quick note that the Portal Axle G63 was launched in 2013 for a limited run. Now, it's only fair to balance out all that AMG fury for diesel enthusiasts, and you'll have 2 5-cylinder choices in the 250 and then later G270 CDI. The inline-6 and V6 are more common, with the early 300 GD, then 350 and 300D through the 90s. Many like the V6 diesels of the mid-2000s in the G320 and G350 CDI. The very last run is the G350D, built from 2015 onwards, and is desirable for those that like the old-school looks and feel of the G-Class, but want more modern features and interior. Now, before we move on to safety, a handful of G-Wagon trivias. First, the 6x6 that many of you know, but there was also a 4x4 squared that was a mad offshoot of the G500 or G550, looking like more of a Hot Wheels car than a customer car, but was actually sold at Mercedes-Benz dealers. Production has always been in grass at the Magna Steyr factory, and before any variant of the G-Class enters official sale, it is torture tested, also called Schockel proven. If a new variant can't pass the test during development, it can't be sold. So the G-Class you buy isn't just marketed as an off-road capable vehicle, it is built to go up mountains, wade through water, and crawl through the mud. Safety testing on the G-Wagon wasn't conducted by either Euro NCAP or North American IIHS. Mercedes did carry out their own testing, but these aren't scored in the same way. Generally, the G-Class cars are tough, but have some notable accidents due to rolling over when drivers attempting to turn sharply. Now moving on to common faults, and if you enjoy the channel, remember to subscribe, as only 5% of viewers are subscribed to the channel. I will note that because this vehicle had such a long production, it may seem like I'm going to go through a lot of faults. Now, this merely reflects the larger data set that I was working with, and I'll try and specify certain time periods where possible. As ever though, these are possible issues, not guaranteed ones. However, just like I did for the newer G-Wagon guide, I need to say that the parts for G-Wagons are expensive. The car shares very little with other Mercedes models, so if you need parts, they are going to cost a lot. Electrical faults in the 2000s to 2010s is a factor for G-Wagon owners. 2000s onwards cars can suffer several intermittent faults from the windows to traction control units and central locking to dead batteries due to modules failing to go to sleep. A good specialist will know most of the answers and be able to get the car on the road fairly quickly, but not necessarily cheaply. The rear signal acquisition module, or SAM, is a known weak spot. Again, looking at 2000s built cars, but a bit more specific to the 2000 to 2007 builds, there is a larger report of rust. Mercedes' reinvestment in 2006 to bring back the quality the brand had built its reputation on made a marked difference, but the transition from the 90s to the 2000s do get more reports of rust. The hot spots to check on any G-Wagon are the window frames, door sills and rear tailgate. The area around the rear lights and the wheel arches are also hot spots that may not immediately be visible, but need to be checked. A check over the solid axles will require a ramp or some uncomfortable shimmying around on the ground. We advise to never go underneath a car that you don't know if it's not supported. Sure, it's on four wheels now, but you don't know if the hub is being held on with hopes and dreams, so not worth the risk. But a bright inspection light shone from the edges will give a good idea of the general condition underneath and any obvious fractures or impact witness marks. Sticking around the underneath, control arm bushings and ball joints wear faster than your regular car, so if you hear any clunking or knocking on test drive, these are likely past their best. The steering damper can wear, resulting in vibration that some owners may just pass off as normal. It isn't, and the steering damper does need replacement, roughly every 50,000 miles or 80,000 kilometers. The interior of a G-Wagon may be designed to look tough, but the reality is, after many years and owners, there are several interior parts that break at a fairly common rate. Firstly, the air vents, which can crack, then the headliner can drop, and the power window switches and the panels they sit on are another hotspot for braking. All the fixes for the interior are well understood, and the community around G-Wagons have fixes or repairs for most, but replacement parts can be expensive. One hotspot I always see on cars that haven't been driven often is cracked tyres. If buying from a previous owner, get an idea of whether this is just a weekend car or used daily. You can also check the date code on the tyre sidewall. Remember, just because the tyres have plenty of tread doesn't make them good, or in some cases even legal, and G-Wagon tyres, like the rest of the car, are not cheap. I mentioned earlier that you should get a bright inspection light underneath the car to look for any damage or fatigue of the suspension. While you're there, shine a light around the transmission, the differentials, and the transfer case along with the engine. You're looking for any shiny or wet-looking residue, as leaks from any of these can and do happen, especially as rubber seals age, and some owners really do like to get some off-road action in. A leak may be a fairly simple fix, but if a seal has been left to leak for too long, then the damage may be to the component, in which case you'll need to take a deep breath and reach further down into your pockets. Those were the must checks and the most common issues, but in the next half I'm going to go through the slightly rarer issues that are still worth looking out for. A vibration along the driveline or a shudder at certain speeds will likely be a failed universal joint, or is sometimes a drive shaft out of balance. While the universal joints are usually noticed by specialists during a service and replaced before they become too much of a problem, cars that haven't seen the right amount of care or serviced by mechanics that don't specialise in off-road or Mercedes vehicles at an increased risk and seem to be the cause when owners have suffered this. Usually a previous owner that has skimped on servicing, and then you take it to a specialist that knows their stuff and learn of all the repairs that are needed. Water leaks are usually failures of either door seals, windscreen seals, or the sunroof. You may hear a clicking or cracking noise when operating the sunroof. This isn't normal and is likely the cable routing slipping out of alignment. Reseating it could be a DIY task if you are confident. Most replace the cable assembly, as it will be over a decade old anyway. Any signs of wet carpets are likely blocked sunroof drains, but can also be failed seals. It is worth remembering that the door seals need to be treated to stay in the best condition. There are a lot of products out there, and a couple of decades of hot and cold weather, mixed in with some occasional wading or off-roading, will likely leave them misshapen and brittle. Now, I should really stress here the amount of time when I have sold cars and I've heard knocks, bangs, clangs, ticks, pops, cracks, creaks, scratching and grinding from old cars. And an owner has told me that it's how it was designed, believing that because some off-roaders feel like tanks, they should sound like them too. And this just isn't true. And having worked in classic cars and new cars, I can say that unless you're looking at really sort of genuine classics from the 50s, maybe a Series 1 Land Rover or an old Jeep, something like that. Everything should be solid, especially in a G-Wagon. The car won't bang and clang because it's built tough. It will clang and bang because it's broken. Don't let people sell you a G-Wagon that sounds like the local scrap merchant clattering down the road. These are great cars when kept well, and Mercedes went to quite an extent to tempt buyers that were cross-shopping this against very high-end luxury cars, so clattering and squeaking like garbage trucks just isn't how they managed to tempt Range Rover and Bentley buyers into the Mercedes G-Wagon. Weak air conditioning will be a leaky O-ring if you're lucky, or a failed AC compressor or expansion valve if you're not. The blend cooler actuator can also fail. The electric motor can strip its gears and fail, resulting in poor cooling. A sign of this is a repeated clicking, and it's a labour-intensive repair, although thankfully the parts are not normally too expensive. Other HVAC issues that can arise include the blower motor and the resistor, usually affecting older models. Inspect the windows of any G-Wagon thoroughly. The original design was for almost flat windows, so that anywhere in the world could replace the glass with a temporary repair if you were trekking through areas far from civilization. But this design is also more prone to chips and cracks. Even a small pebble can crack a window, as the energy is poorly deflected, and so the glass takes a lot of the impact. Some owners add clear films or even polycarbonate shields if they regularly go off-road. Aside from this, depending on where and how a G-Class has been used, it can suffer rust on the frame. Again, you'll need a bright light underneath to tell unless it is severe and working its way up the edges of the chassis. Now, one issue which isn't the G-Wagon's fault is unfortunately mileage tampering. Of all Mercedes cars, this one appears to actually suffer the worst, especially earlier models, as the odometer system used by Mercedes wasn't particularly complex or easy to be, it wasn't difficult to roll back. There are a few things that you can do to check this. Firstly, looking at a car's interior wear items. When I sold cars, we used to say it's the inside that ages a car, not the outside. Obviously, that isn't always true, but with a good detail and a paint correction, you can wipe years off the age of the exterior of a car. But the interior is where people sit for all of those miles, and the pedal and the seat edges and the lip at the bottom of the door where people catch their heel when they get in and out of it. If you see a car with low mileage but a brake pedal that looks like it's come off of a Le Mans 24-hour racer, then look a bit closer. Is the steering wheel worn more than you would expect? And what about the door card where people rest their elbow? Another way that is possible if the car has an ECU that can offer this data is to check the gearbox mileage. Now, this isn't completely foolproof, as sometimes gearboxes get swapped or the ECUs get swapped, they break and they get new ones, whatever. But generally, most people that are clocking cars to defraud people out of their money and try and sell a car for more than it's worth, they only do the instrument cluster in front of them. They don't think about the gearbox mileage. So that's the area to check. And if the two numbers really don't match up and you had suspicion anyway, maybe worth walking away from. Now onto the recalls, and this is an overview of the more recent recalls, as many from decades ago will no longer be valid. Between 2015 and 2017, there was a global recall for Takata airbags. The G-Class was one of the cars confirmed to be affected in some batches between 2003 and 2014. Mercedes identified cars and called owners to get them replaced. In 2017, there were 3 recalls, the first for the steering coupling on the G550 and G63 AMG models due to insufficient torque at factory on some 2013 to 2016 cars. The second is for the inner door handle cable on the smaller batch of cars, and then the ESP software on 2016 to 2017 built cars. In 2019, the emergency call system and the ABS hydraulic unit were recalled separately, the first for cars built at the very end of production, while the second was for cars built from 2011 to 2018. In 2022, there was a single recall for an injector seal in 2016 to 2018 cars fitted with gasoline engines. Then in 2023, there was a recall that singled out the G300 CDI professional line. A small batch of cars were recalled for a manufacturing defect in the drive shaft. Now onto the engines, and as mentioned earlier, there are a huge array. So we'll give them all a mention, but focus on those that were more commonly sold. This is going to include everything from simple 4-pot motors to a turbocharged V12. So let's start with the petrol. Early on, there was the 200 GE and 230 GE with a couple of carry-on engines from the previous generation, including the M102 engine in a 2-litre and 2.3-litre capacity. These existed mainly for tax reasons and had 118 and 125 brake horsepower. Fuel tests back then aren't really worth repeating now, and for the most part, both engines are compromised on both power and efficiency. Overall, they are simple and were paired with either a 5-speed manual or an optional 4-speed auto. A handful of classic buyers like these, but overall, they are rare, and most buyers prefer the larger engine models. The 6-cylinder engine started with the 300 GE or G300, followed by the G320. The latter was released in 1994 and lasted to 1997. The 300 model has a 3-litre M103 engine and made 170 brake horsepower until a late update boosted this figure to 174 brake horsepower. Again with a 5-speed manual, but this time a late 5-speed auto was added in 1996. Fuel economy was a very old test cycle, but 15 miles per gallon or 18.7 litres per 100 kilometres was officially recorded. Common issues include the valve stem seals and cylinder head gaskets, along with the fuel system, where the injectors can cause a rough idle. Generally, this is a fairly solid engine, with lots of 200,000 mile examples rolling around. The follow-on to the G320 was not a follow-on for all. Some markets get this in 1994 as a 3.2-litre inline-6 with a 24-valve dual overhead cam with 210 brake horsepower. Others get the G320 in 1997 with a V6 engine. Either way, the 1997 for all markets get a V6. If you shop for the inline, it's a 210 brake horsepower and is an M104 coded engine. The V6 is an M112, and while both could technically be found with a manual gearbox, the V6 is almost always the 5-speed auto, whereas the inline engine is either a 5-speed manual or 4-speed auto. The V6 makes 215 brake horsepower, and fuel economy on either engine is again poor, with a 17 mile per gallon or roughly 14 litre per 100 kilometre officially recorded. But again, this is on old test cycle. The G320 is one of the more common options if you're looking at earlier G-Wagons, and while the inline engine is fairly strong, it is likely to be an age-related issues like poor condition wiring or ignition coils. The V6 has gained a strong reputation, with several owners' feedback getting the word bulletproof. Wear items are a factor though, and oil leaks, along with mass airflow sensors, plus the crankshaft pulley. However, again, this is against the backdrop of G320 owners saying they will keep the car until the end of time because they trust it will be there ready to go whenever they need it. Now, the 6-cylinder is the line in the sand for many people to accept performance with an 11-second 0 to 60 mile per hour sprint. However, as we move into the V8 engines, performance improves. Initially, we have the 1993 to 1994 500 GE. These are desirable due to the limited production, with 446 built, carrying the M117 5-litre from the R129 Mercedes SL, making 296 brake horsepower. It scored a 0 to 62 time of 11.4 seconds, which was respectable at the time. These are very collectible due to their rarity, and there was even a Hook-branded 500 GE, but only 3 of these were made, all going to Switzerland. Data on these are limited because of their rarity, but oil leaks and seals failing are a noted issue on the engine due to its age. Get these sorted, and the main problems will be heat soak, causing a no start if you take your collector car off-roading to deserts. Now, the G500 and the G550, these were not only popular with new buyers, but have become the desirable choice for many on the used market, starting with the M113 engine back in 1998, which is a 5-litre paired to a 5-speed auto with an under 10-second 0 to 62 mile per hour time, making it the sweet spot for those looking around this era. Fuel economy, 16 miles per gallon or 17 litres per 100 kilometres. The US EPA gave a figure between 12 and 15 miles per gallon. So, it's not going to trouble the diesels for efficiency, but there is a trade-off that many wanted the added power in this era of G-Wagon. And as mentioned earlier, the 1998 to 2008 years weren't the best, but Even though Mercedes quality was a bit lacking at the time, camshaft position sensors and leaking coolant systems and oil leaks are part of ownership, the M113 is known for reliability. So it's actually the rest of the car you'll worry about more than the engine on these years, and it's easy to find adverts with well over 200,000 miles on a used G550 and 500. Now in 2008, the engine is replaced with the M273, which is a 5.5 litre V8 that slashed the acceleration figure to just less than 6 seconds on the 0 to 62 mile per hour run. So really jumped it forward. This was thanks to a power output of 388 brake horsepower. Fuel economy was barely improved, so about the same that you're going to get mile per gallon. However, on a run, it can be a bit better, and that is thanks to the 7-speed auto, which began to be phased in across Mercedes models in 2009. So, as I say, those high-speed cruises can be that bit more efficient. Now, what I found here was that for many, the 5.5 was a step up and became the desirable choice thanks to its added speed, although the M273 engine wasn't perfect. The plastic intake manifold and the port motor are becoming they're becoming more reported as these cars age, and the timing gear and balancer shaft were issues on the very first cars built. And thankfully, Mercedes had already resolved the issue as it was reported on other Mercedes models, so the G-Class wasn't so affected by this. It was only the very, very early cars. The 7-speed may hunt for gears, and the transmission's the electrical connector seal will likely fail at some point, okay? That will cause oil to find the TCM or transmission control module. If caught early, though, you can avoid an expensive repair. Leaks can also be found from the valve stem seals and will show a puff of smoke on startup if suffering this. In 2015, emissions laws meant that the 5.5 V8 needed to be replaced, and so Mercedes used the bi-turbo V8, and that was coded M176. It's a 4-litre, which kept acceleration figures the same, but officially recorded better fuel economy at 22 miles per gallon in the UK. That was 19 miles per gallon in the USA, and 12.1 litres per 100 kilometres in Europe. Interestingly, many feel this engine changed the character of the G500 and the G550. Many liked the naturally aspirated engine, and while the M176 is more powerful for more of the time thanks to its turbocharged unit, it was also a modern engine in what was a very old school car. Now, some loved this mix of new and old, others less so, and the advantages of the M176 is that it's a good engine overall, but being a modern motor, it can suffer things like carbon buildup, high pressure fuel pump issues, and there have been reports of some turbo faults or failures and some of the sensors failing. All of these issues are on a more complex engine, and they are they're more expensive to repair a lot of the time than the older engines. That is just a reality of modern engines though, and the stricter emissions control systems. Now, after the G550 and 500, there were the AMGs, but we'll save them until last. The diesel lineup begins with the 250 GD and 300 GD. The former is a 5-cylinder naturally aspirated diesel with 94 brake horsepower and a fuel economy of 20 miles per gallon, or 13.5 litres per 100 kilometres. The military versions were larger recipients of this engine in the 250 GD Wolf, and civilian versions are fairly rare to find today. The 300 GD is again naturally aspirated, but with 113 brake horsepower and similar fuel economy. Acceleration was counted in cycles of the moon for both of these two, but again was popular in the military model. This was the preferred diesel engine early on for civilian buyers, and while no engine that has celebrated its 30th birthday will be perfect, the old tech is resilient and comes from a time when getting there eventually was more important than doing so in good time or with low emissions, so if you want a robust workhorse, these could be for you. Then we make our first step towards somewhat acceptable power with the G350 TD or 350 GD turbo diesel, getting the OM603 engine from the 300 model, but with, you guessed it, a turbocharger. Power is boosted to 135 brake horsepower and a blistering 16-second 0 to 62 mile per hour time. Fuel economy improved marginally too. However, despite this, it isn't a particularly common engine option, as it didn't pull in that many 300 GD buyers to upgrade, and then as time went on, it has been found that this particular model has an appetite for snapping its connecting rods, likely due to the hot rod drag strip acceleration. Anyway, the failure rate meant that many have looked for engine swaps over the years, even if they haven't suffered a catastrophic failure. Mercedes did make up for their error though with the G300 TD introduced in 1996. The OM606 made a respectable 177 brake horsepower and was the first diesel to dip into the reasonable acceleration times, at least for this size of vehicle in the 90s, with a 14-second dash to 62 miles per hour if equipped with a manual gearbox. A 4-speed auto was also offered. This engine was offered until 2001 and has a reasonable enthusiast following thanks to its decent power, fuel economy of 23.3 miles per gallon or 12.1 litres per 100 kilometres, and its general robust nature while also being serviceable by a home mechanic. The wiring harness is getting old though, and the eco-friendly wiring brought in at this time is falling apart with age. A good service record will take care of the turbo, but neglected ones can have issues with the turbo and manifolds, and then the cooling system is another hotspot area. In 2001, we get a new diesel option, and the inline 5 returns in the G270 CDI coded OM612. Power is rated at 155 brake horsepower, but its new diesel technology means a wave of torque from very low down, helping get a 13.5 second 0 to 62 mile per hour sprint time. Fuel economy was scored at 25 miles per gallon or 11.3 litres per 100 kilometres. This is a simple diesel engine compared to the ones of today. No DPF limits potential issues, and the professional or worker model was popular with this engine. Generally, it's a reliable unit, but injector seals and turbo actuators are two big-ticket issues if they are faced. These may have been before DPFs, but still have some emissions systems like an EGR, which can cause issues if clogged. The crankcase breather and seals for the turbo can also become an issue with age and mileage. However, if you loved diesel V8s in 2001, this was your moment, as the G400 CDI was built for 5 years until it was removed from sale in 2006. This 4-litre turbo V8 makes 247 brake horsepower and could sprint to 62 miles per hour in just a hair under 10 seconds, making it a really attractive option. The fuel economy was affected by this. That was the price you paid. So 20 miles per gallon or 12.4 litres per 100 kilometres. That was the official rating. It's paired with a 5-speed auto only, and there is a little known G500 version which only went onto the armoured guard variant that had this engine. Now, overall reliability is mixed. It will require quite a lot of upkeep, and if servicing is scrimped on or missed, you can run into a lot of issues, including cracked intake manifolds, intercooler leaks, turbo failures, and a lot of sensors and electrical problems. Mechanics say it's a complex unit that's hard to work on, adding a large chunk of labour to even fairly simple repairs. So if you can do repairs yourself, then you'll really want to. The V8 and inline 5 leave, and the V6 starts in 2006. The G320 and 280 in select markets is an OM642 and gets updated through the years, but initially starts with 222 brake horsepower before it's rebadged in 2009 as a G350 CDI, the last year where it's made with limited emissions equipment. The 2010 gets AdBlue and a slightly less power at 210 brake horsepower. Then in 2015, the LS variant of the engine is released with a new badge of G350D, making 240 brake horsepower. Initially, the car is a 5-speed before being paired to the 7-speed in 2010. Fuel economy varies slightly across the years, but 25.2 miles per gallon or 11.2 litres per 100 kilometres is scored just before the final update. This is by far the most popular diesel engine, partly thanks to its 12 years of production. The big relief for owners is that while the engine isn't perfect, it is very common across the entire Mercedes lineup, and so parts are not only plentiful, but can be reasonably priced too. Again, the intake manifold can cause trouble, although the seals on the oil cooler are being found to degrade around 70,000 miles or just over 100,000 kilometres. There was actually a recall for this on the later G350D models. Oil feed issues on the crankcase has dramatically increased wear and can result in engine failure. Engine oil coded MB229.51 is the recommended one, and if in any doubt of an oil cooler, get it checked. The later emissions equipment will surprise few diesel owners to find that is the leading complaint, as with any modern diesel, and access for any work on this engine can be tough, leading to higher bills, as parts of the engine may need to be disassembled to make simple repairs. However, lots of owners really like their V6 diesel and wouldn't part with it. Then there are the AMGs, but a quick note, I won't cover the 2002 G63 V12 AMG with 437 brake horsepower taken from the S600, as only 5 were built and data on the naturally aspirated V12 is thin. The 500 GE AMG, along with the G36 and G43 AMG, are all very rare. Power is rated at 326 brake horsepower, then 272 brake horsepower, and 279 brake horsepower. All are now collector grade, along with the extremely rare 2001 V12, are generally only for those looking for unique classics. Little can be said for the reliability due to the low number, but if you want a rare part of Mercedes history, these are the ones to look for. The G55 AMG with an M113 5.4-litre V8 was first offered as a naturally aspirated option in 2002 and 2003, making 354 brake horsepower before it became the G55 compressor in 2004 with 469 brake horsepower, with an upgrade to 493 brake horsepower in 2006. And then there was the later upgrade to boost the car to 500 brake horsepower from 2008 to 2012. No matter which engine you get, you'll have a 5-speed auto, which Mercedes had to stick with, as it was the only gearbox that at the time they could handle the torque of the G55. Fuel economy is rated at 17 miles per gallon or 15 litres per 100 kilometres, but owners consider this test figure only achievable if you tickle the throttle with a feather. Now, the earlier non-compressor model is rare and shares some issues with the G550, but it is reasonably reliable as it isn't particularly stressed, although all G55 AMGs can suffer issues with the exhaust where the welds crack due to vibrations. The compressor models can suffer with failed plastic couplers for the supercharger, and the supercharger clutch can also fail and will result in no boost on a test drive. The electric pump for the intercooler fails with age, and most owners just change them for upgraded pumps. The transmission is running close to its limits here, and it isn't uncommon to hear owners with 100,000 miles needing a rebuild, especially if previous owners have treated the accelerator like an on-off switch. You may be lucky if you feel hard shifts and find the gearbox hasn't failed, and it is in fact the conductor plate that is at fault. The nameplate that is better known in modern Mercedes is the 63, and this enters in 2012 on the G-Wagon. However, I should note, unlike the G63, it doesn't get the 6.2-litre V8 naturally aspirated engine. The G63 is a 5.5-litre bi-turbo M157, which isn't unique. The E63 AMG starts with a 6.2 V8, which is then switched to the same 5.5 V8. Anyway, this is one where the celebrities loved, and the G63 has quickly become known as a status vehicle to own. It would have later become a 6x6 for a limited run of very enthusiastic buyers with deep pockets. It makes 536 brake horsepower initially, and then 563 brake horsepower from 2015. A 7-speed gearbox can now be paired to the engine, and official testing gave a 20 mile per gallon or 12.5 litre per 100 kilometres, and owners say they do actually get near this on long runs. Reliability is a mixed bag. Many G63s have been owned and serviced with no expense spared and are great buys. However, as you can imagine, several have had a mixed ownership history. The injectors and the head bolts are two areas of concern, and the head bolt design was revised by Mercedes that some owners then got replaced. These engines are sensitive to poor fuel, and so super fuel is needed, and lower grades can gunk up injectors. The oil separator and PCV is almost guaranteed to need work at some point. Some owners fit catch cans, but these are aftermarket kits. The turbos are actually pretty tough and should last quite a long time unless they've been subject to abuse and the engine hasn't been allowed to cool down after hard driving. Oil changes are critical to turbo life, and if an owner has proof of shortened oil changes, this can be a positive buying sign. I will add here, though, that there are several sensors and minor parts that can fail, and all of them will be more expensive than you may expect to fix, but this really just reflects the high-performance engine of the time rather than a negative directed at the G63. Finally, there is the ultimate version of the ultimate version. Few of you will have ever seen these, but they are incredibly special vehicles. The G65 AMG. Launched in 2012 and made until 2018, here is a V12 twin-turbo stuffed into a car originally designed with a 100 horsepower diesel for a farmer to run around it. The 6-litre V12 made 1,000 newton meters of torque, and so the old 5-speed gearbox had to be used until 2016, when the 7-speed was tuned to be able to take the power. The same time is a switch of engine from the M275 to the M279. This was the only time in the US was offered the car, making them even rarer. Now, power is initially 612 brake horsepower and then 630 brake horsepower in an old school G-Wagon. Honestly, this is a mad decision by both the buyers and Mercedes. Working on the engine is a nightmare, and its incredibly high cost when it was new was only matched by very high maintenance costs that went on and still go on to this day. Only a few hundred were made each year. Here is where, as an automotive enthusiast and a journalist, I can say this is a thunderous machine and well worth a drive, because it's never going to be repeated again. But as an owner, suggesting it as an owner's guide, it's hard to say this is anything but a crazy proposition unless money really isn't part of your thought process in life. This is also the engine used in the limited edition Maybach G650 Laudelet. If you've never heard that word before, it's no surprise. No one really makes convertible limo type cars anymore, but for 1 year you could get that as a G-Wagon. There are reliability issues, but honestly, it isn't worth going through, especially as so many parts were one-off for the G65 only. Assume you'll have a service bill around 10 times the price of the already expensive G63 each year, and you'll be in the right area, as this really is a proposition for those cross-shopping $500,000 supercars. So on to our picks, and let's start with the sensible buy. A G320 or G350 diesel is the one that can offer reasonable running costs, and as a bonus, lots of engine parts are shared with more common Mercedes models away from the top end, keeping repair costs somewhat livable. The G500 and G550 will be the one to pick if you value a bit extra power and don't want some of the heavy-handed emissions equipment, and for many it's easier to find someone to work on the V8 than it is the diesel. At the top end of the budget is the G63 AMG. The big bonus here is that of all the AMGs, these were the most popular, meaning you can be a bit more specific on colour and options that you want, while also being picky over finding the one that has the very best service records. But keep your wits about you, as these are high risk of mileage tampering and faked service records, so it's well worth paying a Mercedes specialist, whatever they charge, to do a full inspection before laying your money down. Of course, if you plan on really impressing at a car show, you'll need to dig so deep into your pockets that you're in your socks for a G65. As ever, all the best with your search. And if you're thinking of a newer G-Wagon released in 2018 or any other Mercedes models, there are plenty of guides on the channel to check out next.